getting back to Hal.
Yeah.
Scott, I don't think you're driving very well today.
Have a lie down.
If you continue, I'll have to intervene, Scott. Yeah,
I'm afraid I can't do that, Scott.
Yeah, exactly. It's all getting a bit spooky. All right, well, hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. We've got Iain back in the room this week, and we've got a special guest, Paul Myles, who is editor of TU Automotive, where you write about cars and ting.
I do. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, it's a pleasure, mate. Well, it's long overdue. So Paul also sits opposite us in the office. So this is a well-trodden path, but the first time we've recorded it. So, so what we're going to talk about this week, we're going to start off by talking about automotive stuff. You've just been to a big car sort of trade show in Frankfurt.
Yeah.
Thanks for finishing my sentences, Pierre. Is this a new goddamn precedent?
It's a car...
Just point the camera.
Car gathering.
Yeah. Yes, I tripped over myself. I'm sorry. God, I can't be perfect like you.
Unforgivable.
So we'll talk about that.
Yep.
And then we're going to talk a bit about an event that Iain and I went to earlier in the week to do with edge computing.
Which has some relevance to cars.
Which definitely has some relevance. We'll definitely shoehorn
it might not,
car-y stuff into everything in honour of Paul. And then hopefully if we have time, we're going to finish off by asking why anyone would buy a Huawei smartphone these days. And just to remind you that if you're watching it on the site or on Facebook or on YouTube, you can listen to it on iTunes or SoundCloud or countless other podcasting platforms and vice versa. Right, okay, so cars, I'll just sort of head it up before I hand the ball over to you. We write about connected cars a fair bit. That's the relevance to Telecoms.com is a connected car, which is increasingly a thing. And that doesn't mean just a car where everyone in there has got their smartphone. It's where the connectivity is somewhat more integrated with the whole of the car, or at least at the very least the infotainment system. Although, as we cover a fair bit with 5G, they're expecting it to get to a stage where 5G can enable things like autonomous driving, which frankly still alarms me. I'm not sure I'd want to get in a car that wasn't driven by a person. But there we go.
But are you happy to get in other things that aren't driven by a person?
Well, I can handle things like a DLR, where it's just going in a straight line. That doesn't
on tracks. Yeah.
And it's on track. There's a limited amount the little computer brain can screw up on that one, I think. I just don't want them start suddenly getting funny ideas. Or you have it sometimes if you get Google Maps and you go, I want to go here, and it suddenly halfway along decides, no, this is a better route. And then what if the little car brain goes, right, and then swerves off into traffic? I'm sure there'll be all sorts of contingencies. Anyway, we'll get onto that. So yes, we cover it from that point of view, and then there's obviously the in-car infotainment, which increasingly seems to be a sort of projection of the stuff you've got on your smartphone, but accessible in the sort of unique car environment. So those are the sort of interests for us: 5G, in-car infotainment, and that sort of thing. And then obviously the operators, the telecoms world, they've got an interest in having a piece of that action. There may be fresh revenue streams just from providing connectivity services to cars. But then the big one is the battle for the sort of captive market that is the person within the car. So I guess the first thing I'd like to ask you, Paul, is the car perspective on this. Why is connected cars just as big a deal from a car perspective? And just give us a little bit of background on that.
Oh, very much so. They see this as a way to monetize the car experience. And they are desperate to get their hands on the data
the new oil.
Yes, that's of course the telcos have already. Yep. But the advantage that they are selling in a car is you do have that captive focused audience or bored witless in the back of the car. They want something to do, and so you are giving them a much better entertainment experience, whether that's with screens for the back of the headrest, which are already there, or which they're talking about now, projection onto windows. So you have the internal windows are laminated in such a way that they become screens.
Then you got to go.
God, that sounds dangerous.
Well,
turn to the side,
there's all sorts of possibilities. That they could have drop-down screens. They could all sorts that they're talking about. Projection is something
that's a thing, is it? Okay, I didn't
very
know that.
much, yeah.
Right.
But their big selling point is that they've got a damn big aerial, antennae compared to a phone.
Okay.
And so reception is going to be that much better.
I see.
And this particularly has for 5G with the amount of data coming in and the quality of data coming in, you're going to have a higher quality experience on better screens, on better platforms for each and every passenger in the car, especially now with zonal infotainment, acoustics.
So that's zonal within the car. It's just like surround sound or whatever.
Yes, and zoned so that each passenger has their own experience.
Oh, I see. And you can sort of hermetically seal it in the audio way.
Without any sort of barriers, physical barriers.
It'd be hard to leave the car.
Well, I should point out that I have about a 10-year-old Ford Focus, so all of this is very utopian for me.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we've got a rubbish car as well.
And so, so this is where they see it going, and they see the amount of services they can offer being the carrot for the stick that is giving up your data.
Right.
You that is the price you pay.
Yeah.
And they think that they can make it attractive enough to the consumer to want to give up their data. To say that actually, well, I give up my data for my phone anyway.
Right.
So what's the difference about?
Yeah, well, that's the classic internet / media model, which is you get something for free, and in return, we get to spy on you.
That's it, essentially, and to monetize that spying. But obviously in the cuddliest way possible.
Of course.
Yeah, they won't do anything bad.
Only by optimizing the ads that are served to you to best suit your personal needs.
Oh, it's making suggestions that are voted by other users, perhaps, like a TripAdvisor type thing, so you can depend on it to be accurate. Oh no, you can't. The TripAdvisor's just been done for that, haven't they? But nonetheless, it's a potential that you
I read
trust
somewhere
it.
as well that before we get to the kind of autonomous driving, there's talk. I think it was an article I read somewhere where they were saying you could trigger alerts in the car depending on how someone's driving, suggesting that they're a bit sleepy, or that maybe they should pull over and have a break, or why did you speed up then, and you can even detect whether someo's stress levels are high.
How intrusive would that be?
You've already got it on high-end cars.
Well, I hired a car in France,
henpecking you
and
while you drive.
It was telling me that I was tired. I mean, it was 4 o'clock in the morning, so it was right, and I don't know how it figured out. Maybe I was wobbling. But, just looks at the clock. And
they have sensors that gauge how you're steering. And if it's jerky or wandery, then it will make alerts. Also now the latest ones are eye monitors, where you have cameras looking directed at your eyes.
Right.
So
to monitor exactly how you're concentrating, where you're looking, and how focused you are on what you should be doing. So
one thing we've had for quite a while is a thing called usage-based insurance. Is that what it's called? Where you have some kind of telematic tracking device in your car, and then that feeds back data to your insurer, and then they can see that you never break the speed limit, and you're nice and steady off the lights, and you always indicate before turning, and you're generally worthy of having to pay a lower premium because you're lower risk in your driving style. This feels like a real extension of that, whereby some of the things you're describing, you're basically inviting a sort of Chinese level of surveillance of you while you're in your car. Your face is being filmed the whole time. Wherever they're gathering their data now has information about your apparent mood or sleeping patterns or something like that. And that's where, and I'm sure there's lots of trade-offs. So the usage-based insurance one was always that. You get to pay a lower premium. Or in my case, I probably wouldn't, because my driving style, I don't think, would commend me.
Oh, I think you would, because it's so inaccurate that you get away with it. Yeah, it really is terribly inaccurate. Yeah.
I'm not that bad, but I tend to break the speed limit, and I tend to, sorry, coppers, if you're watching this, please go easy on me. And I tend to be quite fast off the lights, but not out of any sort of boy racer thing, because we can tell I'm not a boy.
So then we have to establish a base. Like a lie detector,
Are you one of those people that honks when other people are really slow?
No, I just like to get on with it. I'm just impatient rather than aggressive. I just want to get there. I don't see any point in dawdling. So anyway, yeah, all that stuff kind of freaks me out a little bit. But then a lot of the stuff, as we've covered many times, especially when we're talking about things like AI on this podcast, I'm definitely the nominated Luddite / catastrophist in all of this. And Pierre's certainly got some good mileage out of his Terminator soundbite.
Yeah.
But I get a bit like that with connected cars as well, in terms of the surveillance aspect, and then obviously once you start getting into autonomous driving, and any time where I just feel the driver is having some decisions taken away from him or her, freaks me out a little bit.
Well, every new car made since the end of March 2018 in Europe has been fitted with eCall. Which is essentially a black box that will call emergency services in an accident. Now, a minor accident, it'll just call the insurance company if it's been programmed that way, if you're linked up to a UBI. But a major accident, without your say-so, it will call all the emergency services out, and it will GPS them straight to where you are.
Right.
And then that
Which is good on the surface.
On the surface, on the surface. But it is surveillance. It's surveillance of you and what
that you don't have an opt-in to either.
You don't. If you buy a new car,
it seems weird that it would come under GDPR or something.
It's not for. It's got an exemption,
right,
because it is for an emergency situation.
It's for a good cause. That's how it happens.
And is this controversial in the industry?
Not really, no, because it's been seen as a good thing, especially by the industry, because they get automatic tracking. Now, at the moment, this is sending data all the time. It's not just static; it's sending data
just
all
waiting
the
for
time.
you to crash.
But are there any consumer groups kind of pushing back on it?
Not that I know of, no. Again, this is awareness.
Yeah.
Awareness comes into it. But my argument about it is that, of course, this data has to go somewhere, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And it sits there in the cloud, a permanent record of everything that car has done, and at the moment not being used by authorities and the rest of it, so we are told.
Yeah.
But who flicks the switch to change that?
Do you know what I mean?
So you are in danger of that, yeah.
If someone breaks the speed limit and runs somebody over, and then the person that got run over says, "Oh, you ran me over, you were over the limit," and that person was like, "No, I wasn't. Prove it."
Yeah,
the
data's there, yeah.
But can you get it though?
It will then. It'd have to be an application naturally to the to the authorities, and at the moment, the car maker will say the data belongs to the owner. So they could technically withhold it. It would then have to be a court case.
And then be like, "Oh, you're hiding your thing.
That's
you must be guilty."
Yeah, well, it'd be a court case just like we've had with Apple and the CIA back in the terrorist attacks.
Who owns the data?
Exactly.
Which is the absolutely core thing. And I would have thought, as any kind of reasonable legal default, anytime data is collected without explicit consent of the user, the data must be owned by the user as a default.
Yes,
you'd think. But this is one of the problems. Slight sort of tangent, but this is how authoritarianism works. The state or the person seeking to impose authority always says it's for your own good. That's how it always works. So that's where, even if this is quite benign in its current incarnation, I think you're completely right to sort of instinctively be wary of where it could lead, because it's like thin end of the wedge, isn't it?
Well, a similar system has just been set up in Russia. Now, I'm not casting any nasturtiums in that direction.
But they're not famous for their exemplary civil liberties.
Well, one wonders whether want that technology in a Russian car. That's what I would say,
Yeah.
Damn right. And so you're just at this motor show?
Yes.
Frankfurt. Is that one of the big ones?
Well, physically, it's the biggest in Europe because it's 11 halls stuffed full.
Oh, right. So it's like a Mobile Congress level of
huge
thing. You need a lot of room for cars as well.
Yeah.
There is that.
Phones, there is some pack in.
And it is very much a showpiece for the German manufacturers mainly.
I see.
It happens every 2 years because it alternates with Paris. And then Paris is obviously a showcase for the French manufacturers.
But with all due respect to Peugeot and all that, I think the German one sounds more fun. They got cooler cars than the French, haven't they?
I'm not sure.
I would agree.
Who else? Citroën. Yes, no offence, Pierre.
Renault, I would agree. Yeah.
Oh, even Pierre would agree. But you apparently wouldn't.
I wouldn't because it's a different feel to it, and it's not so much now about the hardware as the software in the vehicles.
Right.
Is the selling point for so many people. The interior has to be like a new extension of the home. You've
That's
got to feel
isn't it? Because these car shows. I mean, the one that I watch is obviously the one with Jeremy Clarkson, whatever it's called now, Grand Tour. But they're still very much focused on doing it from an old. I mean, they're kind of dinosaurs. Those
they
guys,
are
aren't they? Proudly dinosaurs. But
they're petrol heads.
It's almost like they're kind of slightly behind the times, which is to look at things that they're not really sort of considering at all these days.
It's the connectivity, the facilities, and the environment is what's selling a lot of cars these days. People don't really care. A lot of them don't care what is under the hood.
Is that quite recent? So if it's established wisdom in the car industry that decisions are made more on that than it's 0 to 60 or whatever. Is that quite recent, or has this been the case for quite a while?
I think it's been growing over the last decade,
right.
And it's accelerating with electric vehicles because people are being told, well, if you're really only interested in the internal environment, you really don't care whether it's electric or petrol or diesel.
What's the disadvantage of electric? Is it less performance?
No, more performance.
Charging stations, I would think.
It's infrastructure. It's
Right.
infrastructure and range.
Right.
And plus, the third one is cost. They're more expensive. Per size of vehicle, they're more expensive. Yeah.
Do you have to? Does the battery last forever?
No. No.
That's the problem. You can't
same
get to
as
the
a
next
phone.
charging station.
No, but
Same as a phone.
But it's the beauty from the industry's point of view, because they're hoping to get to a situation with a phone where you do sling it. And you get rid of it after X amount of time. Now, you'll hold on to an electric car longer than you will a phone, but not as long as you would with an internal combustion engine, because the battery will go pop.
After how long, typically?
Well, I mean, at the moment, they're offering 7 to 8 years warranty on batteries,
Right.
But only 70% of performance. So it's like an internal combustion engine being offered a warranty of 100,000 miles, but will only warranty 3 of the 4 pistons.
Yeah.
So
if it drops off by 70%, that basically affects the range rather than the speed.
it can affect both, but mainly it's the range.
Right.
Yeah. And that's what most people are concerned about. They want to be able to say, I can go from A to B over a certain amount of distance and be sure I'm going to get there without an hour-long charge up or something.
I mean, in the last year, you would tax it to the max to make sure it goes below 70%, so they can replace it for free.
Well,
just before the warranty ends.
Yeah, I mean, yes,
you know what I mean?
I mean, you could do that.
Launch control every day.
Yeah, it's more the charging. If you supercharge it all the time, but
what does that mean?
With these fast chargers, with very high outputs,
they spank the
absolutely
battery a bit
spank
more.
them,
Right,
and they destroy the life of the battery. And so it's like, for example, with smartphones, you're never supposed to charge them more to 100%. You're meant to keep them under 100%,
really?
Because they, it can.
I never got that memo.
Yeah.
We're supposed to know about this.
I leave mine charging overnight, man.
No, really bad.
And
that's basically my routine. Plug it in at night.
It's the discharge, the charge and the discharge.
Yeah, discharge and so I think it's between, ideally kept between 80 and 20%.
Right.
If you keep it between there, then the battery will last longer. But then you don't keep the phone that long anyway. So
I'm really neurotic about my phone always being charged up. Ask Iain, I've always got a little charger.
In the pub, it comes out straight away.
Yeah, well, that's why I have a BlackBerry. You only do it once a day, if that,
That's because you never use it, because it's rubbish.
That is old school.
Burn.
But there was a Grand Tour, actually, with... what's the younger guy? The slightly younger one, Hammond driving a Rimac, one of this Croatian electric car, and he took them to Switzerland, and they kept going to the same town and going to these rubbish museums. And the reason was it's the only place that had a charging station for about 200 miles.
That's it. So you're locked. Yeah.
And then it blew up.
What is typical range of a sort of normal electric car?
Well, if you're looking at sort of what you call a mass market, but I wouldn't call it mass market, but the entry level vehicle would be a Nissan Leaf style.
Right. And we're saying, just for the sake of clarification, this is full electric, not hybrid.
No, full electric, battery electric vehicle.
Yeah.
And the base ones start at about 150-ish miles, and then you can upgrade to the more expensive ones that'll do, I think the latest is about 230. But of course, the caveat to this is claimed. So it's in certain...
Up to.
Yes, up to. So you hit adverse conditions, and that will go down.
And if you do have to charge it and you don't want to use one of these fast charging that sort of kills the battery, then how long are you talking about?
Overnight at least.
It's an overnight job, right? So you can't just go to sort of a charging, petrol type station.
So basically, you just couldn't drive to like the north of England.
No.
Oh no, not unless you use superchargers,
Right.
which there are a loose network of superchargers.
And even then, that's like a 20-minute stop.
Yes, at least 20 minutes. Yeah, at least 20 minutes.
You can have
Have a beer.
Yeah, exactly. Get someone else to drive. Stick
Yeah,
it on autopilot.
definitely get someone else to drive.
Yeah,
it.
stick it on autopilot.
You'd probably go to the
Police when they
bathroom
watch
for
this
20
one.
minutes.
I know.
Speeding, drinking.
Copper's like, all right,
Yeah.
we've got you now, son. Yes, it's obviously only a joke.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, at this show, were there any sort of particular highlights? Anything jump out at you?
Well, from the technology point of view, you had the concepts. I think the best concept there was the BMW 4 concept, battery, but I suspect also battery and assisted with a small gasoline generator, like the i3 and i8. But this is going to be called the i4, and it was a production-ready vehicle, more or less production-ready. Though I think they'll change the grille because bloody ugly. But that is a highlight because it brings it into the corporate fleet world that they're gonna want this car. And
what is it? What is it that makes it better than what we've got now?
Oh, well, only because it's a full-size vehicle that isn't a specialist vehicle.
Okay, like a Leaf's a pretty tiny little thing, isn't it?
Yes, it's a tiny thing. You're not going to get many businessmen in the back of it with their pop-up presentations and stuff, So it's not really a corporate type of car, whereas this definitely is.
Is that a really big market, the fleet market?
Most cars are bought through fleets.
Is it?
Yeah, most of them.
We need like a limo, electric limo. That would be nice.
Would.
Well, I mean, would it? I don't know. I'm agnostic about this technology.
It'd be quiet.
But, it's quiet.
I don't believe that for 1 second that you're agnostic. I think you have strong opinions about all of it. In fact, I know you do.
Yeah, I do. No, I mean, I think batteries are there for the industry to make money. And if in my audience, it's very much about that. They are a business audience who want to know where the money is.
I see.
And that's where the money is in batteries. Now, as consumers, that's a totally different argument.
And can you swap it out? So you've come to 10 years, battery's knackered.
Most no. Most you can't.
So battery's gone, car's gone.
Yes.
Basically.
Yeah.
Damn.
That's a huge amount of waste.
It's
Isn't
hardcore.
It?
I thought you could
They
just
talk about
That's
these
the
things being
beauty of it
environmentally friendly.
That's the beauty of it as a business model. I didn't say anything about climate. Climate has got nothing to do with battery vehicles.
No.
They're not there to save the world. People are getting this mixed up. The tree huggers of the planet of jumping on this technology.
Makes you wonder why Clarkson and those guys don't have a go at this sort of thing.
I
Because
bet
they don't
they
look
do.
into
They
it.
do.
Just go,
They have.
well, they do, but they don't do it for that reason. They don't sort
No.
of go, well, hang on a minute, is it really more environmentally friendly?
It
Because they don't
isn't.
really care.
So
do
let's
they?
cover that, actually. That's good. It's a bit of a tangent, but it's an interesting one. So superficially, you'd think, well, you're not using a fossil fuel to run the car. You're not coming out with exhaust and all that sort of thing. You're not making this noise, all that sort of thing.
But
Surely
you
that's
are.
better.
No, you are using fossil fuel. More than 70% of the Earth's electricity comes from burning coal and
Yeah.
gas.
So your
and
point
oil.
is that electricity's got to get generated.
Yeah.
No,
So-
and also to make the car itself.
And then you're wasting
Yes.
the car because you've got to chuck it away with the battery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whereas you can have an old,
So-
an old Nissan Note.
And so they
that's
give
lasted
it.
you for-
So they give it these little cheesy eco names like a Leaf, but we're saying it's no more eco-friendly than just buying a Ford Focus or whatever.
And even for the clean air, even if you ignore the climate warming side of it, even for the city clean air, they're not good. Because 60% of a car's emissions come from its brakes and from its tyres.
Really?
Yeah, not from its engine at all.
wow.
But if it's electric, you use the brake way less because of
No, you don't use
engine
them.
regen.
You get more tyre scrub. You get more tyre scrub, and those are microplastics going into the water table.
Yeah.
They go into the fish.
I
You eat the
disagree.
fish, you get filled with microplastics. It's just, it's shocking.
It's shocking. How could you, Pierre?
Yeah.
I mean, really, I can see a future where we're back on trams and horse and cart because there'll be
streetcar.
less pollution. They'll be stinky, but there'll be less pollution.
I know a lot of methane comes out of horses' arse.
Yeah, that's the only issue.
That's just a greenhouse gas. You just can't win, can you?
No, you're never going to
just stay at home.
Yeah.
If you care about the planet, don't leave the house.
Cycling more.
In that sense, I'm very eco-friendly because I tend to just sit around the house most of the time. So
I don't drive very much.
I should get some
wife.
brownie points.
No, well, my one advice is if you are tempted to change your car or whatever, which the best thing is to hold on to your car forever. But if for whatever reason you have to change it, buy a 40-year-old one with no electronics bar the spark plugs, and that will go on forever. And that's the best for the planet.
You can always replace stuff.
Yes, and it's the best for the planet. It's the cheapest way to own a car, and also the most efficient with carbon emissions because it's so easy to fix. The electronics, for example, and I spoke to a guy in Continental, and he says, any car after mid 1990s is junk in 15 years anyway. They're obsolete because all the ECUs go.
What's that?
The ECU, the little computers that monitor things like brakes and all sorts. And you can have 5 or 6 in a car these days. The plastic they're made of breaks down in 15 years.
Degrades.
Yeah. Right. So all of them need to replace. They cost, if you can get them, if they're still making them in 15 years' time, they cost upwards of £400 or £500 a pop. Now that car isn't going to be worth not only the collective amount of ECUs you're going to have to spend out on, but the work necessary to fit them, because a lot of these are buried so deep in the mechanics.
It's not worth it.
You're dropping the engine out.
Yeah.
The car's a write-off in 15 years anyway.
So for someone who, to some degree, champions the car industry, you're making me just never want to buy a car again.
No, I'm just saying be aware of what you need transport for. And if you are very climate conscious, then these are other things to think about.
Yeah, I'm not.
Don't get a tech car. Technology.
I'll steer it back. Actually, given that this is a telecoms podcast, I'll steer it back just to ask Paul, about the in-car infotainment is the term we use to describe entertainment and information. So, one interesting topic for me is sort of driver distraction. So the more technological tools are put at disposal of the driver, the harder it is to control them. So I think most modern cars will have in the middle of the dash, they'll have some kind of touch screen, but you can't drive and use a touch screen. You're taking your eye off the road by definition.
And also just trying to touch the things when it's moving is just
quite. So you spend twice as long just trying to hold your hand in the right place. So can you, Frankfurt, in your experience, tell us. I'd like to know a little bit more about the sort of the user interface and any other stuff you've encountered about the technology or anything to do with connectivity that might sort of overlap with our world.
Well, obviously there was a move a little while ago for gesturing, so you don't even touch it, it's gestures. But really, that's been superseded by voice. Voice
which seems like the
assistance,
best thing for a car.
Yeah, and this is really going to go everywhere. Every car's going to have it, where it'll be governed by voice for the reasons of safety as much as convenience. However, there is a caveat to this, and this brings me back to distraction. You were talking about distraction, and just talking to something is distracting. The research has shown that hands-free phones actually decrease your ability to react more than actually having the phone to your ear. Your reaction times are worse than being over the drink drive limit.
So if
you use hands free.
So even though your eye's still on the road, your hand's on the wheel, to quote Jim Morrison. The fact that you're having this conversation means that
your brain
a large part of your brain is just not on the
especially if you're a man,
the case.
We can only focus on one thing at a time, and you really do suffer. Your reaction times suffer to the extent that you're better off going and getting 3 pints of beer and driving and not talking than you are
say no more.
Yeah, driving with.
Have we tested it?
Hands free. It's been tested. It has been tested.
Right. Well, there's no real solution to that, is there?
Well, they're talking about banning hands-free, aren't they now?
Yeah, they're talking about. But then you'd have to ban Siri. You'd have to ban Alexa.
Yes.
because it's the same conversation.
What about conversations with people in the car?
Well, yes, that does have a distraction, but apparently it's less.
Is that because the passengers react when things are happening? Like you don't
They
talk
help.
to the driver when he's about to negotiate
They
a tricky
do.
roundabout?
Yes, they help. They tend to only nag you when they think it's safe to nag you, like on a motorway. So they have a less of effect. Whereas someone remotely on a telephone somewhere in another part of the world, they don't know what the hell's going on. Yeah. So they'll ask you really pointed questions, and that may need your brain power, and that brain power takes away from your reaction times.
And then back to the sort of surveillance thing. I can imagine a time in the future where someone has a crash, and then they can prove that they were chatting to their in-car infotainment at the time, and then that would somehow increase their culpability.
Of course.
And all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So it all gets quite convoluted. I mean, it's tough. The technological forces mean that we're going to have more and more stuff at our disposal, and judging by what you say, it's really important to car buyers. I don't think there's too much distraction. For some reason, and it could just be me, the voice UI still doesn't seem to be quite smooth and intuitive enough. No. So you should just be able to get into the car and just go, "Hello, car. I'm driving to Newcastle today. Plot me a route and stick on some Metallica, and then that's it. You just get going, and that's not distracting you very much. But then when you start to do more complicated things, or when you start syncing it with like office stuff, and you start writing emails while you're driving and using the voice UI, that's going to be massively distracting. But then how do you regulate or police? And where's the threshold? There's all
you had
sorts
some
of question
experiences
marks.
of this, didn't you, earlier in the week?
What's
I
that?
remember sitting opposite you in the pub with you on the phone and going, "My voice is my password," 10 times.
Yeah, it was Lloyd's for some reason wanted me to register my voice for phone banking. I had to do that. So, yeah.
But if you're doing that in a car, then that's massively distracting.
Yeah, but then
now
the driver monitoring systems that are in there will alert you. I mean, that's the thing. You're rabbiting away, writing some convoluted email, and the car will recognise that you're wandering slightly or not driving in the usual way you usually drive, because they can learn. They can learn that how you usually drive. If you are a very jerky driver, within certain parameters, I'll accept that. If you're a very smooth driver, they know that if you start driving jerky, there's something wrong, and they will alert you, and maybe even interrupt the service. They could interrupt the service.
It's getting back to Hal.
Yeah.
Scott, I don't think you're driving very well today.
Have a lie down.
If you continue, I'll have to intervene, Scott. Yeah,
I'm afraid I can't do that, Scott.
Yeah, exactly. It's all getting a bit spooky. All right, well, that's really interesting. We'll have to move on from that, but we'll have to get you on again soon for more of that sort of thing, because it's the two worlds, telecoms and cars, are colliding more and more,
very much so.
And it raises all sorts of really novel issues. But Iain and I went to an event this week called Edge Computing Congress, was it?
Yeah.
And there is definitely some relevance to your world in that, because edge computing is basically distributing the cloud, i.e. getting a large number of smaller data centers dotted all around the place. Now, you say, why would you want to do that instead of having one the size of 10 football fields, as per Facebook and Amazon and all that? And from a telecoms point of view, one of the main reasons for doing it is literally to reduce the physical distance between the terminal, the phone or whatever, and the cloud, which is basically the aggregation of all the servers that we store stuff on. And the reason you want to reduce that distance, a big reason, is to do with latency, i.e. the amount of time it takes for a signal to get to that thing and back. Where increasingly pretty much everything is cloud-based. Things like Siri, for example, they're cloud-based. The computing of the voice recognition and providing the answers is not all done locally. A lot of it's done remotely. And then you could start to get into 5G applications that definitely overlap with cars, to do with vehicle-to-vehicle communications. So that's a sort of road safety thing, whereby if you've got cars constantly pinging data backwards and forwards, then they can to some degree anticipate each other's actions and coordinate each other's actions and all that sort of thing. And then you even get into the autonomous vehicles and remote control. A low latency facilitated by 5G and edge computing means that you could control a car remotely from quite a long way away and not have to have a lag. Presumably, if you're controlling a car and there's a lag of half a second, that's a complete deal breaker, isn't it?
It is. I mean, I've just posted a findings by Oxbotica.
Great name.
They're the commercial wing of the Oxford Robotics Group, who did the Mars rovers.
Right.
And they've been running autonomous vehicles in London over the last few weeks, 5 of them. And their systems have a reaction time of 1/2000th of a second to cope with the sort of traffic situations we have, and that's the sort of speed you need. So half a second is
just not good enough.
Yeah.
So there's lots of reasons to have that. I mean, the bit I was at, so you were there for 2 days, Iain, I just went for the 1 day. So the bit I covered and wrote up, there was lots of discussion about who would own the edge. So big data centers are owned by the big IT players, the big internet players. The edge of the network, the RAN and so on, is obviously owned by operators. And the mobile edge computing, which is another way we describe it, is sort of like halfway in between. So in principle, it's up for grabs between the IT/internet web scale world and the operator world. And so there's lots of discussion as to whether there's an opportunity for the telecoms world to own the edge.
Yeah.
Whether that's desirable, and if so, how they could go about it.
I mean, people think it's an opportunity that they are in a good position to kind of capitalise on because they own a lot of infrastructure between those points. As you say, you've got the big data centre companies with just a few of these massive places out in the desert or whatever it is, and then you've got, at the other end of the of the link, you've got the user with his smartphone or the car itself, and the operators have all these central offices and bits of equipment dotted around that they use for, hosting whatever it might be, and this is why there's a push to kind of turn some of that stuff, turn those central offices or whatever they might be into mini data centres that they could use.
So they become edge computing nodes.
So they could become edge computing nodes. So
that seems pretty straightforward. Why not do it?
Yeah, there is some stuff happening. So I think Deutsche Telekom in Germany has got 5 now. I think it calls them cloudlets, which are basically re-architected central offices. And they're not using them commercially, but they're trying out applications, including things like road safety stuff. And they talk about it a lot in the context of virtual reality gaming and things like that, where again you need really low latency, otherwise you kind of throw up everywhere because it makes you feel ill. So. But there's all sorts of barriers to them actually doing it because one of the big ones is the business model's not really very clear. So
business model for what?
For these applications, they're not tested. Who would pay for it? I mean, the gaming one's a classic one. Would someone like my son who sits in his room playing Fortnite and is now getting quite into it to this extent where he wants a good console and But apparently the really top gamers, they kind of do worry about things like latency. But for ordinary people, are they really going to say,
they'll drop £100 on a mouse?
Yeah, are we really going to pay to get a higher latency connection? It's not something operators have ever billed for in the past. And they even had a guy, I think I can't remember which operator it was from, but he said that he hadn't been able to tell the difference on Fortnite between when he had latency of below 20 milliseconds and a connection that was much higher than that. It was sort of 80 or 90 milliseconds. He couldn't really spot the difference. So he said experts do. But
but as you say, with actual VR, with totally immersive things, it's a bit different because if there's too much of a disconnect, then you just get that motion sickness and all that weird stuff.
And I think on the consumer side, the feeling is that consumers aren't going to spend more money than they already do. There's a finite amount. This is the whole reason operators haven't been able to make money out of data, because everybody already had a phone. They're already spending 30 odd quid a month on voice calls, and data's just come along and replaced that. It's not like they've added on that amount, and so there's a real challenge to kind of monetize it. And maybe you could get, this is why it gets talked about a bit more in the sort of business context, maybe. And then this gets into the ownership issue then. So besides turning their own central offices into mini data centres, what they could look to do is maybe go out and say, take a car company like BMW that might want to have a factory that is like a mini edge. They can do a lot of processing within the factory environment. The signals doesn't have to come back to, a kind of a big data center in the middle of Berlin. They can keep everything within the site. They still have a mini 5G network, and all the edge processing happens there. So you're kind of doing it with the kind of customer's own infrastructure. But then that in that case, that would obviously be the car company that owns the edge.
Well, that's it.
itself
We
in
had a
physical
chat
way.
with one guy his name I forget, but you, me, and Ray were chatting to him, and he was saying there's loads and loads of.
Is that Farid Singh? I think
Could be, yeah. And he's saying there's loads of great sort of use cases and all that sort of thing. And I don't doubt him. He obviously has forgotten more about this than I'll ever know. But But then he presumably has a sort of commercial interest in making that case. And there was another guy, an academic from Carnegie Mellon, who said they had come up with an actual sort of project, which is traffic crowdsourcing, Waze style, but without the driver having to do. So, a big problem with Waze is this, you're going to drive past, you're going to see an accident, see some roadworks, you then got to fire it up, and who's going to do that? And so if you can automate it using, I think a lot of cars have little cameras these days, certainly for things like parking and stuff. Yeah. So if you can automate it, then apparently the edge facilitates that somehow, I suppose, in terms of sort of localization. I can't remember precisely how. I embedded the video, but I've forgotten what
I'm sure there are some use cases, but I can't see that there are. But it's the other thing that got talked about besides ownership. There was a couple of panel sessions called something like the chicken and the egg, which comes first. So do you go and build all the infrastructure and kit out all your central offices and go and sort of do that big overhaul? And I was talking to some people there on the telco side, and it's not necessarily the cost of doing that that's the real issue. It's not like building out a new 5G network in terms of the investment that's required. It's more to do with the resources that you need at each of those locations. Once they become data centres and they're not central offices, you might have to have staff there.
Right.
You might
so
have
there's
to
OPEX as well as CAPEX considerations.
OPEX, you've got all this management stuff. There's a lot of different companies that need to be, it's this whole kind of complexity that you have that you're introducing. That's one of the
and every month or quarter or year, that's not paying for itself.
And then it might not be paying for itself, but the application companies are sort of saying, well, until the infrastructure's there, then obviously we don't know how much capacity we're going to have. We don't know what the circumstances are going to be like. So it's very hard for the developers to actually come up with applications until they see what they're being offered.
That's the real chicken and egg thing, and we might cover this when we talk about Huawei smartphones, because back when I was a smartphone analyst, we did have other operating systems. So I took the piss out of your BlackBerry ownership, but obviously there was a time 15 years ago when BlackBerry was perhaps second only to Symbian in terms of install base of smartphone OSs, and with good reason. It had lots of sort of unique services. People used BlackBerry Messenger, and it was the first really mainstream sort of remote email thing. But the reason they died out and Symbian died out and Palm OS and nascent attempts to take them on like Tizen and Migo and all that sort of thing is this catch-22 of install base and ecosystem maturity. So developers don't want to develop apps for an ecosystem that's too small.
Yeah,
the economies of scale aren't there. It's just not worth it. But on the flip side, people don't want to buy into an ecosystem that hasn't got apps, hasn't got sufficient app support. So you're in a bit of a bind, which is why it was quite clear. I mean, hindsight's always 20/20, but it's quite clear to me, perhaps even 10 years ago, certainly 7 or 8 years ago, that we're bound to have a duopoly of Apple, which has unique circumstances, because it doesn't actually have to appeal to third-party developers, and they're great at selling devices and all that sort of thing. And there was only ever going to be room for another smartphone platform that supported everyone else. Microsoft's tried to hang in there, but initially they were going with the same licensing model as they use for PCs, which is where you pay for a license. But the problem was Android is already out there, which is free. Again, free in inverted commas in the classic Google sense. Yes, it's free, but then Google owns your customer. And again, as we're about to cover, can cut you off from the ecosystem anytime it wants. So yeah, I mean, I think that applies a little bit to what you're saying about the edge, and there is that. It's more of a blind investment, isn't it? It's a sort of build it and they will come. But what if they don't come? Then you've wasted tons
there's
of money.
also a worry on the telco side clearly at the moment that if they don't do it, if they don't sort of take that risk, then maybe somebody comes along on the sort of cloud providers. So because
exactly.
they might not have this big thing gets made about they don't have the real estate, but they're in a position to probably acquire some real estate at some of the really big companies.
Yeah, well, we've said on the pod before, Amazon with Whole Foods and all that. Yeah,
so how much of a challenge would that be for them to do? I don't know. And then you get concerned about. So the other talk that's going on is to what extent do the operators actually try and collaborate with the likes of Amazon and Google on in this area? Do they let them use their edge infrastructure to provide? What do they let them use it for, basically? Because they could end up getting sort of squeezed out and just being the kind of connectivity people again, and they don't want that to happen. That's always been the story.
So to some extent,
them,
you could think of it as a defensive investment. And actually, Paul, just getting it back onto cars, that question comes up in terms of the connected car as well. So in a connected car, we've got three sort of infrastructure stakeholders that all want a piece of the action in terms of the commercial opportunities that creates. We've got the platform owners, Google, Apple, and I know we've got people like BlackBerry's got QNX, which, funnily enough, it initially, and correct me if this isn't how you perceive it, it initially bought QNX to replace BlackBerry OS, to sort of, for it to be the new smartphone OS. But then by the time it got its act together on that, it was game over and Android was already there. So then they pivoted back towards cars, but they're still pretty big heavily, feature in cars.
Heavily
QNX,
for cybersecurity and for running even things like acoustics. Acoustic management now is very big. They've just really solid up a relationship that they had for some time with Jaguar Land Rover.
Okay.
And they are now heavily in bed with them now for all their infotainment needs, and it's all run through QNX. And
an embedded platform would typically have to play nice with Android or iOS, would it?
Yes, they are agnostic in as much as they have to be able to take Apple and Android, and then basically any other platform.
Indeed.
But that said, I imagine they get a slice of the data. In some shape or form, they get, and this is where you talk about real estate. Every car is a real estate. It's a mobile real estate, and that's what the car makers are offering. They're offering these the connectivity providers real estate for what they want to happen, and this is where I think the relationship between the two will grow, and I can see that being a defense mechanism against the digital giants, like Amazon, Google, Apple, because if they can get a good enough relationship where that they can make demands, we get X amount of this data and we get to monetize it by ourselves, and you don't get to have it all. That's the end game. I think they're looking towards.
You can actually turn cars into sort of mobile networks, like have a core network built in the car. In fact, that's what there's a company that was talking about. The safety network they're trying to build here in the UK, actually using police cars to do it, and not sort of as moving kind of as moving points of presence,
and collecting data as they go, which is, and then feeding it to each other and getting a bigger picture quicker. That's the thing. You get that if you like crowdsourced data. Picture very much quicker by having more and more vehicles in part of this mobile network.
Better sense of where baddies are and what they're up to. Cool. Okay, I'm going to move it on from there now because we're running out of time. And this week, Huawei launched its latest flagship device called a Mate 30. Which, in terms of hardware spec, is up there with everything else. It's got that triple camera thing that Ray was saying, reminding him of an electric razor.
The thing that people get scared of.
The people who are allergic to holes. Did you know that?
So bizarre.
There's a phobia. Not allergic. Yeah, there's a phobia. People are phobic to small holes.
It's called trip something. I can't remember.
And there was a little story. I mean, it would be a typical storm in a teacup bit of sort of media coverage. But apparently, so Apple's launched this new phone, and it's got
Huawei. Oh,
yeah,
Apple,
but Apple did it. It was actually about Apple.
Right.
So this has got
it?
this has just got basically one camera on the back and a flash, I think. But this one's got three. One's wide angle, one's telephoto, and all that sort of thing. And so you've got all these little discs with holes in them, and apparently certain people are triggered by these things. Also, they also are by crumpets for the same reason.
Crumpets must be really
Lots of
hellish
holes. Yeah,
for
crumpets
these
are just
people, because that's
crumpets. They run
Yes.
screaming.
The evil crumpet.
Yeah. So yes, there we are. So Huawei is no more sympathetic to these poor people than Apple was, and it's got a triple camera scenario, and all the bells and whistles and a great chip and all that sort of thing. But because of the aggro going on between the US and China, Google's had to say, right, we can't work with you anymore, Huawei. And Android is open source, so you can still have the core Android thing that makes it tick, but you can't have the user experience that everyone's used to, because that comes with the Play Store and Google apps, all of which you have to license from Google, which Google will now not license to Huawei. And I just wrote a piece just now, just saying, who'd buy one then? You know, even if Huawei does a great job, and they've got deep pockets, and they're throwing billions at their own developer ecosystem, but it's the same thing that happened, for example, with BlackBerry 10 years ago. There's some great apps. You got BBM. You got all these unique things, but they just couldn't compete with the sheer volume of apps that was on Android, and so they just users just went away with a few notable exceptions.
Would it be a bit different in Huawei's case though, because of the sort of Chinese scale kind of thing? They could just drive Chinese consumers towards.
Yeah, so it doesn't apply to China because I think Google's largely cut off.
It's cut off there anyway, and the Chinese government could just go buy a Huawei phone or else.
They could do that. I don't think they're quite as authoritarian.
No,
they're getting there, but and there's plenty of competition. Don't forget Xiaomi, Oppo, Vivo, all that sort of thing. But yes, the user experience drop off by not being able to be supported directly by Google is nowhere near as severe in China, and that still does account for. China ships about 100 million smartphones a quarter.
What's the number a year of smartphones that are shipped?
Well, 400, isn't it?
No, but globally. I don't mean China.
Oh, globally. Oh, yeah, a billion or so, I think.
Right.
But so China does 100 million smartphones a quarter. Huawei's got about a third of that market, so that's about 30-odd million. Their total in Q2, they shipped was about 53 million. So let's say 20 million of those were ex-China. So still the majority of their shipments are still within China, but 20 million is a big one. I can't see why anyone outside of China would buy one and accept that compromise on the user experience.
But then why did they launch it in Germany?
Well, I mean, they haven't given up. You know, they're trying to convince people to do it. I'm just saying that fair play to them for still fighting. I just think it's a forlorn hope. Because why would you do it? Why would you buy it?
What's happening with the sort of devices that are out there at the moment that are running on?
Yeah, I think that's all right. It's new ones.
Okay.
So legacy ones, if you already have a Huawei
smartphone,
smartphone, like Jamie's got a Huawei smartphone, that's all right. That's still covered.
But would it be a problem for getting sort of software updates in future and things like that?
That I'm not sure.
Provide
I'm not sure. I suspect that.
I don't think you'll get, if there's a new version of Android, you won't
get it.
Install it.
Right. Okay, well, that's quite possible. On the flip side, it could be that pre-existing business arrangements before the Yanks started putting the kibosh on it still stand.
The old ones still support Gmail and all that stuff.
Yeah, but you won't be getting the latest updates. Yeah, probably right.
If you're right, this is a massive story because I think about 50% of their revenue now comes from smartphones.
Yeah, it is a massive story.
And all this talk that's been happening recently about them talking about cloning the 5G business, and selling it to a Western company, the thing that The Economist broke.
Yeah.
So they could... sort of overcome some security concerns. I mean, I was talking to Ray at reading about this, and he said, well, I can sort of see why they might do it because that network side of things is not really a growing market anymore.
Right.
It's the opportunities for them are in areas like the enterprise and the smartphone business. And their smartphone business is what has been fueling revenue growth for the last few quarters at least. So if this does kind of go off a cliff, then they really are in
by
trouble.
my back of fag packet maths, they could lose 20 million shipments a quarter.
Yeah.
So 80 million a year.
You do the math
which would
on
be
that.
Well, you what?
You do the math on that. That's a lot.
Yeah, well, quite. Which is about 2/5, let's say, of their total shipments.
Yeah.
So that's a massive drop off.
Yeah.
And you guys tell me, Paul, especially you're happy enough to have a phone that doesn't have a lot of the apps that I take for granted on my Android phone.
Oh yeah,
but it doesn't seem to bother you.
It's not my original Bold. Put it that way. It's the Key 2, so it is Android. So it does have all the access to apps.
Right, okay.
Yeah, it's just that it does still have a keyboard, so that I can write stories
fine.
and
Sorry, I stand
emails.
corrected.
Yeah, so it's not the old Bold. That said,
I'd forgotten that they'd gone all in eventually, belatedly.
But that said, I got to be honest, because I'm not a massive app user.
Right.
So it literally is just a bigger screen for me, just so I can see what I've written. Is the only difference between this phone and the Bold for me, because I just don't use any apps.
Right.
You know, but I know I'm a dinosaur of the old generation who remembers when you had Bakelite telephones and you put your money in.
If we get you another pod, we'll get you to give us some of your Fleet Street anecdotes. One other thing on that subject, slight tangent, but sort of pivoting it back towards you, Paul. This geopolitical aggro that is at the root of all this. So basically, my view is, yes, there are legitimate security concerns about Huawei, but it also is being used as a proxy, as a pawn in the battle of wills between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping. To what extent is this aggro between the US and China? To what extent does that affect the automotive industry?
It does affect it, in as much as we don't know yet how that's going to affect the tariffs going into China, which is a massive market for the auto industry. That's why big players like Volvo, although they are Chinese owned, but more especially Mercedes, Daimler, and BMW are all setting up, and Volkswagen, should I say, are all setting up big installations in China itself. So that to escape those tariffs, albeit having to give a lot of the credit and the money to Chinese partners, because that's how it works, isn't it? They have Chinese partners, but that they're busily doing that because it secures them from that problem. You know, they don't. America can do what the hell it likes as long as they're in China.
And manufacturing in China. There's no crossing borders.
That's it.
Is there much of a Chinese car industry?
Oh, huge! Yeah, massive.
They got their own domestic producers.
Makes, Chery, Geely.
Okay.
Some of the big ones.
The new cabs
GMC.
here are made in China. The new taxi
GMC.
electric cabs.
Right.
Yes. The
Chinese.
They're owned by China. The electric cabs. Yeah.
So does that? Are most of the cars sold in China Chinese?
Yes.
Right.
I mean, there are obviously the premium models they like from the West, but the vast bulk are Chinese.
Okay. All right. So that's a thing, and I seem to remember there's another thing when we were chatting about this before. Back to the old batteries. China is the source of a lot of the materials that go into batteries.
97%, I think.
97%
of the world's resources. Yeah.
Damn! What of everything that goes into the battery, or just the rare earth stuff?
Rare earth and I believe the cobalt, and phosphates that they own.
So a lot of cobalt in a car battery. What is it chemically?
Oh, well, I'm not.
Presumably not like a Duracell, is it?
It's
sort of lithium ion.
Yeah,
it is lithium.
Yeah, lithium ion.
But it's Chinese produce sort of lithium as well, do they?
Yeah, the core from it was called rare earth.
Yeah,
and they have 97% or 98% of that.
So that's a pretty big deal. Isn't
it's
it?
a big deal, and then the rest of the stuff they bought up in Africa, all the mines in Africa.
Okay.
And so they have a stranglehold on the technology or the assets for the technology.
So they haven't played that card yet, have they?
No, that's interesting. Though,
they haven't
it?
played that
puts them
card.
in a really strong position in
Massive,
terms of
both
negotiations. You would think.
Smartphones and cars, all of it, massive. So they have not played that card, and one hopes they don't. Because it's.
Well, Xi seems a lot less impulsive than Trump, which isn't saying much. I think my dog's less impulsive than Trump, But yeah, he's playing a long game.
Yeah.
Partly because he voted himself president for life, so I guess he can afford to be patient, can't he? But he's like, look, I know I've got all this stuff in reserve. I'll play it as and when. Let's see what this nutter has to say first.
Yeah. See how long he's around for.
Yeah, exactly. After the next election, then maybe we'll have another chat. Until then, I'll just let him go on Twitter and stuff.
Yeah. Well, I read some economists saying that also the other bomb they've got is that they own the bulk of US bonds.
Yeah.
And if they dump them on the market in one go,
and the currency,
it will just bomb out the US economy.
Yeah, there is a flip side to that. There's some axiom that says, if I owe you £1,000, I'm in trouble. If I owe you £1 million, you're in trouble.
Yeah, it would screw them as well.
There is that flip side. Yeah. But yes, I mean what you highlight there is just the complete interdependence, which is where sort of trade wars, sort of mercantilism of the old school kind is really anachronistic these days because we're just so interdependent. We're seeing that we're not going to get into it now, but maybe in a pub later, seeing that with Brexit and regardless of where you stand on it, that the almost impossible complexity of unraveling these decades of interdependence in terms of trade, in terms of laws and all sorts of things. That's what's causing a lot of the underlying pain. And the saying goes globally, globalization's a done deal. It's there. So there's a limit to the amount that people can threaten to sort of tariff each other out of existence, because it'll always end up sort of bouncing back, won't it?
Yeah, I mean, while I'm not a Trump supporter by any means, I understand the premise of trying to get a more even playing field.
Yeah, because the Chinese have taken a piss when it comes to
without a
things
doubt,
like currency manipulation, that sort of thing.
Yeah, without a doubt. So it's totally understandable, but there are ways and means that are probably a bit more diplomatic than has been happening, Yeah.
Cool. Okay, right. Well, on that note, I think we've done about an hour. So thanks a lot, Paul. It's great having you in.
Pleasure.
We'll get you back soon.
Will do.
And thanks a lot for listening, and make sure you join us for the next one.